Focus on Headline. All right, let's take a look at what major issues are making the headlines today on Focus on Headline. For this, joining us in the studio, we have our usual Wednesday reporters in Handan and Ijiyoung. Guys, welcome back.
Good evening.
Good evening.
It is interesting that we are... a lot of us have still chosen to wear masks, right? I believe, Jiyoung, you were saying that you are one of the very few people that have not gotten COVID-19 throughout the 3+ years.
Yes.
Super immune,
Knock on
aren't
wood.
you?
Knock on wood.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's very rare to meet anyone
Yes.
that have not gotten COVID-19,
Right.
but it does show you at the same time Jiyoung has been one of the people that have been very careful. Well, we are virtually in most places we have the mask mandates that have been lifted. This including, of course, all of us here at Arirang Radio. We know that the indoor mask mandates in restaurants and so forth, unless it's vulnerable places, it's been lifted. But one of the few places that have been left on the mask mandates are the public transportation, and rightfully so. I don't know if anyone's gone on to the subways, especially during the rush hour. It is packed. Well, South Korea has decided that they're going to lift this mask mandate on public transportation this 2 years and 5 months after the rules were first introduced. But still, many believed, and the government also believes, that the mask rule should be kept at other high-risk areas, this including pharmacies, hospitals, and nursing facilities as well. Tan, you're going to start us off with the latest details on the mask mandate lifting.
Right. South Korea will finally end the mask mandate for public transportation, lifting one of the few last remaining COVID-19 restrictions. Vice Interior Minister Han Chang-seop made the announcement today during a government COVID response meeting. The removal will go into effect on subways, buses, taxis, as well as railways, ferries, and planes from next Monday. As a responsible citizen, I have strictly adhered to government guidelines to the mandatory mask rule on public transportation. But it really was very dreadful, to say the least, especially having to put it on after putting all the makeup on. I'm sure many ladies out there will hear me. They must have felt the same way. And especially during the hot summer days of scorching temperatures. My gosh, it was very unpleasant, to say the least, not just for the ladies, but for everyone. So I'm personally very happy about this removal. But health officials stress that mask wearing is actively recommended for public transportation users during the rush hour and for high-risk groups, as well as those with symptoms. They said the removal marks another step towards complete normalcy, and this was possible thanks to citizens' active participation in quarantine guidelines. They added that for a successful and complete return to normalcy, we need to continue to make efforts to protect the senior citizens. But this doesn't mean we'll be completely mask-free beginning next week. Please note that the mask mandate will remain in place for a few other high-risk areas. Those include hospitals, pharmacies, nursing facilities, and long-term nursing homes and other medical institutions. Lifting mask rules at those places will likely come after Korea lowers the national crisis level of domestic infectious diseases. And those discussions are expected to begin when the World Health Organization lifts the global public health emergency declared with the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. And another thing to note is that in case of pharmacies, those located at open public spaces such as large discount stores, hypermarkets, or train stations will be exempt from the requirement.
Right.
The government is expected to make an announcement on remaining COVID restrictions, including the 7-day self-quarantine mandate for COVID-19 patients sometime within this month. The mask removal on public transportation comes amid a stabilized pandemic situation in Korea. The number of daily new infections have been plateauing around the 10,000 mark for quite some time now, with a number of critically ill patients and deaths on a clear downward trend. According to health officials today, since the indoor mask mandate was lifted at low-risk areas in January, the number of daily new cases dropped by 38%, while the number of severe cases decreased 55% with no new variant of concern.
Yeah, again, if you guys remember, for our listeners out there, we've been at the height of the pandemic, we've been going on looking at some of the COVID-19 figures on a daily basis, we haven't seen this in quite a while. I was kind of curious as to what kind of figures, because Wednesdays are usually when we see the highest number.
Right.
And we are actually seeing a relatively comparatively higher number on this Wednesday, 11,899 new cases. We still had double-digit death. 10 people, of course, unfortunately succumbing to the virus. 147 people in critical condition right now. Again, we've seen even when the indoor mask mandates were lifted that a lot of people chose to wear masks. Again, this including to our guest. I was mentioning that even at gyms where you would assume that people would love to breathe better and take off their mask. I've actually been seeing a lot of people still wear their masks. So I'm sure, especially during rush hour when it's jam-packed with people, they are going to still choose to wear their masks.
Right.
Moving on here, Tan, the government also plans to gradually resume international passenger ferry services between South Korea and China starting next week. So let's get the details of that.
Right. So from next Monday, passenger ferry operations connecting South Korea and China that have been suspended since January 2020 will resume. Preparations are now underway to allow ferry operations from next week, and dozens of routes are expected to gradually open for service over the next few months. All ferry operations linking the two neighbors have been suspended following COVID outbreak, except for cargo ships.
That's right. We're going to move on this time. Look at some economic figures here. Job, employment figures. Always a important figure to look at here. Now, looking at the month of February, the number of employed individuals increased by 312,000 compared to the previous year. Now, some people might say, well, 312,000, that seems like a lot. Well, fact is, it marks the smallest growth in 2 years. So, Chiang, let's get the latest figures on that.
Sure. Now, also, if you exclude those aged 60 and over, the number of employed people even decreased more than 100,000. And also, employment in the manufacturing field also decreased for the second consecutive month, showing that the economic slowdown is beginning to be clearly visible in the job market. Now, the statistics office released data on the February employment trend, revealing that the number of employed individuals increased by, as you mentioned, SJ, 312,000 compared to the same month of last year, amounting to 27.7 million. Now, this is the smallest increase since February 2021, when it was a decline of 473,000. Now, though employment has been on the rise for 24 consecutive months since March 2021, the rate of increase has slowed for 9 straight months. Now, the Statistics Office explained that last year's huge employment growth and the declining population kind of impacted the numbers that show a decline for the past 9 months and even for February as well. Now, employment decreased in industries, as I mentioned, such as manufacturing, finance, insurance, wholesale, retail, transportation, and so on. Conversely, employment increased in the health and welfare and accommodation and food services. Now, employment growth was seen among those in their 50s and 30s, while there was a decrease in those for the age 20 or younger and those in their 40s. Now, the youth employment rate fell by 0.4 percentage points to 45.5% compared to a year ago. So that's a similar compared to last year.
Yeah, again, and the figure that we often look quite closely is the 20s and 30s, right? Especially the 20s coming out of college or whatever it may be. If the employment figures are bad, it kind of shows you the economy. But again, a lot of the additional jobs that we've been talking about in the past were sort of like, part-time jobs for those in their 60s, right? I mean, good news for those in their 60s, right? There's a lot of people who retired, they're looking for additional income and things like that, but they're not full-time jobs. And you, again, taking out those in their 60s and over, that number just drastically drops down here. And so it certainly shows you the current state of the Korean economy right now. Let's talk about President Yoon Suk-yeol announcing his ambitious plan today to build the world's largest-scale semiconductor cluster. This by attracting up to 300 trillion won in investment. Now, This is, again, part of President Yoon's strong drive to further boost the country's chip industry and secure a competitive edge on the global stage. Tan, tell us more about this.
Sure. President Yoon has repeatedly stressed that advanced technology like the chip industry is Korea's strategic asset that's crucial not only for the economy but for security. And today he made a blockbuster announcement that the government is seeking to form a 300 trillion won semiconductor cluster in the capital region, aiming to develop the complex into the world's largest scale. President Yoon noted that although South Korea already has the world's top technologies in certain areas, such as memory chips and OLED displays, but he emphasized the need for government and civil support for further industry growth. The envisioned cluster of system semiconductors will be set up in Gyeonggi province, which is expected to harbor 5 advanced chip facilities and around 150 materials, parts, and fabless companies by 2042. The new complex will be located near existing chip facilities run by Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix, as well as a number of parts and equipment companies and fabless firms that will be closely connected and further nurtured to develop into the world's largest mega cluster for semiconductors. The government's ambitious plan is not limited to the Greater Seoul area, though. President Yoon said 14 new national advanced industry complexes stretching across 33 million square meters will be built outside the capital region to nurture and develop the country's space, future cars, and hydrogen industries. The government is also pushing to inject over 3 trillion won to support next-generation semiconductors needed for power generation, vehicles, and artificial intelligence, and others by 2030. South Korea is also aiming to nurture 10 fabless firms with annual sales of over 1 trillion won by extending support for their prototype production. And all of this is part of the government's comprehensive plan to promote the country's 6 key industries, namely chips, displays, secondary batteries, bio, future vehicles, and robots, which are expected to be backed by corporate investment of over 550 trillion won by 2026.
And this is not just a bold move from the Yoon administration, but I think it is the right move right now, because one of the things that we're noticing at this time, if you guys remember back like in the 90s and so even before that maybe, wars happened fight over who has the most amount of oil. That oil was basically the thing, right? And now I think we're living in an era where we know that there are certain countries that are already dominating with their oil fields. Now it's all about the semiconductors, which is why you see currently right now in the United States trying to grab hold of the vast majority of the markets in semiconductors, trying to isolate China out of the semiconductor market as well, trying to secure countries like South Korea, Taiwan, the Netherlands, which are, of course, powerhouses, and Japan as well, powerhouses when it comes to semiconductors. And so growing this industry is going to be big moving forward, and how much more South Korea can grow in this industry will certainly impact the economy moving forward as well. Let's talk about some positive changes for some of our workers, not in broadcasting like ourselves.
Unfortunately, not us.
More specifically us here at Korea Now, who's in the news industry. The government plans to designate Buddha's birthday. On the lunar calendar, it's April 8th. Christmas Day, that's of course for our listeners out there worldwide, December 25th, as alternative holidays this year. Now, Buddha's birthday falls on a Saturday, so this means that the coming Monday will be designated as a holiday to create this long 3-day weekend. Jiyoung, tell us about the latest changes.
Sure. Now, on Wednesday, the Ministry of Personnel Management announced their plans to release a preliminary notice for amending public holiday rules to broaden the scope of alternative holidays. And public feedback on these changes will be collected from Thursday, March 16th until April 5th. Now, currently, alternative holidays apply to occasions like Children's Day, Seollal, also known as Lunar New Year's Day, and Chuseok. But when these holidays coincide with a weekend, a regular workday becomes a substitute holiday, which creates a long weekend. Now, if the preliminary notice gets passed in the parliamentary and gets approved by President Yoon, the new rules are expected to take effect from next month in April. Now, this means that the country could enjoy a 3-day holiday in May, as Buddha's birthday, as you mentioned, falls on a Saturday this year. Now, this move comes after the ruling party, People Power Party, suggested last December to consider including Buddha's birthday and Christmas as alternative holidays if they fall on a weekend, trying to aim to boost consumer spending, encourage people to rest if they're burned out, and also address demands from religious communities.
There's the 69 work week, but all that aside, I mean, that was the one thing that I did not know is I did not know that there was no alternative holiday or a substitute holiday for Christmas, because I believe the last Christmas fell on a weekend too, and so a lot of us assumed that that Mondays were going to be off, but I learned for the first time that
it wasn't.
No,
so.
And I guess it's only fair that if you're going to have Buddha's birthday, you also have to have Jesus' birthday, Christmas, and so even playing field here. Let's move on here. Some other changes that we're looking at here. The National Police Agency is seeking to raise the driving speed limit to 60 kilometers per hour on low-risk roads that are not easily accessible by pedestrians. Now, this also plans to introduce a flexible speed limit system at high-risk areas, this including school zones. What is this about, Tanya?
Well, the police agency said it'll seek partial adjustments to the current speed limit system on high-risk roads, but it's widely seen as the agency basically scrapping the previous government's speed limit policy. In April 2021, the previous Moon Jae-in administration introduced what's called the 30-50 speed limit policy that limits driving speed to 50 kilometers per hour on main roads and 30 kilometers per hour on high-risk roads around school zones and residential areas. The policy was implemented in efforts to reduce fatal accidents, but complaints have been mounting among drivers who argue that the speed limits are excessive. Many have questioned the need to limit speeds to as low as 30 or 40 kilometers per hour around school zones, even during nighttime. And others also called for the need to ease the limit on main roads, especially during the busy rush hours, to ease heavy traffic congestion. Some have even cast doubt on the government's intent behind the excessive speed regulations after reports came out that the government collected huge amounts of money in traffic fines since the 30-50 policy was implemented. And so the police is seeking to raise driving speed limits to 60 kilometers per hour on low-risk roads that are not easily accessible by pedestrians. It also plans to introduce a flexible speed limit system at high-risk roads, including school zones that will see different speed limits at different times. It also plans to expand diagonal crossing and simultaneous walking signals around school zones, as latest studies show that those tools are highly effective in reducing fatal accidents in children. And in order to crack down on two-wheeled vehicles with license plates on the back, the police will introduce an unmanned traffic surveillance equipment that cracks down exclusively on vehicles with plates placed on the back.
Thank you. Finally, because that's the big thing. I don't know if people know this, but motorcycles and scooters, they don't have license plates on the front. Mm-hmm. And so you notice that a lot of the delivery workers, and I know delivery workers are trying to get deliver the food as fast as possible and things like that. They don't follow the traffic light laws. Right. They go on red, and then it doesn't matter for them if they have the cameras there because there's no license plate in the front. So a lot of people, what they've done is basically everyone has the black boxes, right? The cameras in their cars, and so they can see the motorcycles and the scooters in the front. And so there's been a lot of reports on that front. But I don't know. I've never gotten a speeding ticket in my life.
Oh, really?
Well, that's because
Impressive, SJ.
all of us here in Korea, all of our cars have the dee 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 dee. If there's like a camera, and so if it's telling you to slow down.
Really? Is it just my car? I don't have that alarm. I don't have that function.
Well, on the navigation, on the GPS, they do have that. But
I rarely turn navigation on when I drive. It's my bad habit. But impressive. You're a very responsible citizen, SJ.
Yeah, because after the 20, like last year from April, I'm getting pretty much a speeding ticket once a month.
Because of the 30-50 policy, right?
Yes, the 30-50 policy, and that's the thing. And usually I thought maybe 8 kilometers. If I exceed 8 kilometers, that's the number. Yeah, I think over 5. That's when they give you the ticket. Because I've been getting tickets 8 or 10. So
and this is despite the fact that your navigation is telling you to slow down.
I thought I was slowing down.
I never understood that. I mean, how bad of a driver are you in your car?
I thought I was slowing down. It said I slowed down. So I think I kind of play it. I don't play it safe. So
I maintain a very neutral stance here, but I do want to mention that at times when I saw the 50 kilometer per hour speed limit, it was actually more dangerous because it forced me to speed down abruptly.
Yeah.
Posing risk to the car behind me. So I think sometimes it could be more dangerous.
No, Tana, I remember we were having this talk because down the Nambu Road, right? It used to be 60. And I remember having this precise talk when they went from 60 to 50. We're like, oh my goodness, we're not used to this 50 kilometers because there is a difference between 60 and 50. And there's
huge
cameras all over and things like that. But I'm maybe for increasing it to 60, but the school zones, the thing is, the school zones are not only for places where there's schools. It's also located in places where there are parks. For example, there's a park right across the street from my house, and it's a school zone, basically. And so cars go by very slow, and kids, they pop out of nowhere, right? And so, and that's not only during the school times when the schools are out and things like that. So I think that should be kept, to be honest with you. But
yeah, and it's the most expensive too if you if you speed in one of those school zones too. Yeah, it's different.
And I know 30 kilometers is very, very slow.
Yeah.
But Young,
it's my fault 100%.
Doesn't
take accountability. Yes.
Doesn't take away the fact that I think you're a bad driver. I don't really understand that.
That's going to be my New Year's resolution.
I mean, it's been 3 months, but okay. Let's move on here. We've got some interesting stories coming. We talked about the foundation that was set up where, I mean, it's going to be, generally South Korean companies that are going to be putting money into this foundation for the forced laborers. Well, POSCO became the first South Korean company to donate after the government announced this solution for the forced labor issue here. The steel company announced that they have already donated 4 billion won to the foundation. Jiyoung, fill us in on the latest.
Sure. Now, South Korea's leading steel maker, POSCO, announced on Wednesday that they have already donated 4 billion won to support the government's plan to compensate victims of forced labor during Japan's occupation. Now, in 2012, actually, POSCO pledged to donate 10 billion won to the foundation and has since contributed 6 billion won. Now, recently, the government proposed a so-called third-party payment solution in which the foundation under the Korean government collects money from Korean companies to compensate the victims of forced labor during the Japanese colonial period. Now, the Foundation for Victims of Forced Mobilization is affiliated with the Interior Ministry, and according to the ministry, they will gather quote-unquote voluntary donations from the private sector. Now, while the government emphasizes that donations are voluntary, but South Korean firms that benefited from the 1965 bilateral treaty with Japan, such as POSCO, are anticipated to support the initiative. Now, some of these funds from the 1965 treaty were used to support companies such as Pohang Iron and Steel Company at that time, which is POSCO's predecessor. They received about $120 million, which accounted for 24% of the entire 1965 treaty funds. So that's a lot of the chunk. Now, besides POSCO, state-run Korea Electric Power Corporation, also known as KEPCO, tobacco manufacturer KT&G, and 13 other Korean companies are believed to have benefited from the 1965 treaty. Now, the timing of POSCO's donation is something notable, as the steel company announced its donation only one day before South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol and his Japanese counterpart meet in Japan. So experts say that the timing will mark a positive start of the South Korea-Japan summit, which is a kind of a great present to Japan, but kind of a painful one for the victims.
Yeah, and again, I mean, we talked about how there were some complaints from the South Korean side that, why should South Korean companies compensate or take part in the foundation? But I think a lot of people agree that POSCO is one of the companies that probably should take part in this, including maybe some of the other companies that benefited from the 1965 treaty. Let's talk North Korea. We talked about this earlier this week. We had initial reports early Tuesday morning that North Korea fired 2 short-range ballistic missiles towards the East Sea. This after launching their 2 cruise missiles from a submarine. Now, the KCNA came out on Wednesday saying that they were 2 medium-range ground-to-ground ballistic missile, sort of a somewhat different report to what we got from the South Korean side. Nevertheless, this is, a lot of people are saying, a response to the ongoing Freedom Shield exercise. Tom, let's get the latest on this.
Sure. South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff said it detected the launch from the Changyeon area in South Hwanghae province yesterday morning. The missiles flew some 620 kilometers. According to North Korea's Korean Central News Agency, the North launched, like you said, 2 ground-to-ground ballistic missiles in a demonstration firing drill for sub-military units, vowing to annihilate the enemy. Photos carried by the North state media showed the North firing what appears to be KN-23 missiles from a transporter erector launcher. The state media said it'll surely annihilate the enemy, vowing to fully carry out its duty of fire assault at any time by intensifying military trainings. While the South Korea and the U.S. intelligence are conducting a comprehensive analysis of the specifics of the missiles, much attention is being drawn to the place of the launch. It was launched from Changyeon, South Hwanghae province, on the southwestern tip of North Korea, and it's believed to be a place North Korea has never conducted a ballistic missile test before.
Right.
Experts say that the North Korean regime is expanding its missile systems and diversifying its launch systems and locations, which could pose a greater threat to Seoul and Washington. Many experts in South Korea and the U.S. have already called North Korea's firing of cruise missiles from its submarine a worrisome development. The South Korean military said while normally conducting the Freedom Shield combined exercises under the firm combined defense posture, the military will track and monitor North Korean movements to see if there's a possibility of additional provocations. The U.S. Indo-Pacific Command said that the North's missile launches highlight the destabilizing impact of the North's unlawful weapons of mass destruction and ballistic missile programs.
Again, I mean, the interesting thing is, I mean, the South Korean side saying that it's short-range ballistic missiles, and the North Korea saying, no, it's not short-range, it's medium-range. I mean, so that, even with the United States, they have like a different definition of the I guess, the distance in which the missiles go, but medium and short range, I mean, it's. I guess they're trying to show that it can go further, is I think what North Korea is trying to say. But it was the North Korean version of the Iskander that they shot with the photos available, like Tan said. North Korea, of course, as we've been mentioning, they've been engaging in bolder military actions. This is in response to the Freedom Shield exercise. But it does seem like the provocations are working against its intent. Top U.S. officials have sent strong warning against Pyongyang's provocative acts. Tan, what did they say?
Well, the U.S. has said that North Korea's continued provocations will not affect combined military exercises between South Korea and the U.S. A spokesperson of the White House National Security Council, John Kirby, said on Tuesday that missile launches by the North intended to disrupt or delay the alliance's training events will fail. Kirby said the Freedom Shield exercises will continue and there will not be any change to the joint training. His remarks echo latest remarks made by State Department spokesperson Ned Price, who said North Korea's firing of cruise missiles from its submarine only put South Korea and the U.S. in a position to reinforce in tangible ways the security commitment that they have, including military drills. U.S. Department of Defense spokesperson Patrick Ryder, meanwhile, doubled down that any use of nuclear weapons by North Korea will be the end of the regime.
Other foreign policy-related news. Foreign Minister Park Jin having met with Polish Foreign Minister Zbigniew Rau, this in Seoul, to discuss ways to enhance cooperation in defense, nuclear energy, and other regional matters. Jiyoung, tell us more about this.
Sure. Now, the meeting was held on Wednesday afternoon, and Minister Park emphasized the significance of Minister Rau's visit to South Korea this year, which marks the 10th anniversary of the strategic partnership between the two countries, and proposed to continue strengthening cooperation in trade, investment, nuclear power, defense, and in infrastructure. Now, the South Korean Foreign Ministry stated that Minister Park Jin and his Polish counterpart were on the same page in terms of the progress in defense cooperation. Now, amid escalating security concerns following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Poland has been broadening its partnership with South Korea in the defense and arms sector. Actually, in the past year, Poland signed agreements with South Korean companies to purchase tanks, self-propelled artillery, rocket launchers, and aircrafts. Additionally, both parties discussed the situation in the Korean Peninsula and also in Ukraine as well, stressing the necessity for re-establishing peace in Ukraine and pledging to actively participate in rebuilding and recovery efforts for the war-stricken nation in the future.
Let's go over to the Black Sea here. This was major news that were coming out from the early mornings of today. Russian fighter jet having collided with a U.S. spy drone. This causing the unmanned U.S. aircraft to crash into the Black Sea. Now, this is the first sort of physical conflict militarily between the United States and Russia since the start of the Ukraine war. Tan, do tell us what exactly happened there.
Well, it was the moment the world dreaded the most, right? The war in Ukraine escalating into a direct confrontation between the U.S. and Russia. But this incident over the Black Sea was just that. And it also marked the first time that a U.S. aircraft was brought down after an encounter with a Russian warplane since the height of the Cold War. The U.S. military says the drone was on a routine mission. It said its MQ-9 aircraft was conducting routine operations in international airspace when it was intercepted and hit by a Russian aircraft, resulting in a crash and complete loss of the MQ-9. It added that several times before the collision, the Russian Su-27 fighter jets dumped fuel on the drone in a quote-unquote reckless, environmentally unsound, and unprofessional manner. The U.S. summoned the Russian ambassador to Washington, Anatoly Antonov, to protest against the move. But Russia said the drone crashed after a sharp maneuver, denying that the two aircraft made direct contact. Russia's defense ministry said the U.S. drone was flying over the Black Sea near Crimea and intruded in an area that was declared off limits by Russia as part of what it calls its special military operation in Ukraine, causing the military to scramble fighters to intercept it. Ambassador Antonov described the U.S. drone flight as a provocation and argued that there was no reason for U.S. military aircraft and warships to be near Russia's borders. Tensions have risen over the Black Sea ever since Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014. And since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the U.S. And the UK have stepped up reconnaissance and surveillance flights, though always operating in international airspace. So amid contradicting statements from Washington and Moscow, it looks like questions will linger for quite some time on whether the encounter was an attempt by Russia to disrupt the U.S. drone and its work, and also whether it was a deliberate attempt to bring it down.
Staying with Russia, very quickly, there were some speculations, and I mentioned this yesterday briefly, that the International Criminal Court, they're going to be beginning a full-scale investigation into possible war crimes following, of course, Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Jiyoung, tell us, what are some of these allegations?
Sure. Now, on Monday, the New York Times reported that the International Criminal Court, also known as ICC, would issue arrest warrants related to 2 war crimes in Russia's invasion of Ukraine, citing anonymous sources. Now, prosecutor Karim Khan, who has been investigating the case since last year, is expected to apply for a warrant and prove evidence soon. Now, the war crime allegations involve 2 primary issues. One is the kidnapping of Ukrainian children and teenagers. The ICC has been investigating Russia's abduction of Ukrainian minors, sending them to so-called re-education camps or foster facilities. Now, Russia's aim is to erase their identities as Ukrainians, and the U.S. Yale University Humanitarian Research Institute also revealed that at least 6,000 Ukrainian children have been abducted and taken to Russia. Now, another issue is that this ICC points out is Kremlin's international attacks on Ukraine's infrastructure, including energy and water supplies. Now, although the U.S. government has evidence related to these infrastructure attacks, the U.S. Defense Department opposes sharing the information due to concerns of setting a precedent for punishing U.S. soldiers conducting military operations abroad. And also, President Joe Biden has reportedly not yet made a decision on this matter. Now, the ICC's actions raise the question of whether President Putin can be held accountable. Some suggest that Putin could face prosecution, but there's a lot of skepticism due to Russia's denial of the allegations in the first place, and also the low probability of arrest warrants leading to actual arrests, investigations, and trials. On the other hand, Russia has refuted the ICC's jurisdiction because Russia withdrew from the ICC in 2016.
There you have it. I'm sure that story is going to continue to develop. Guys, thank you very much for your reports today. Drive safely and slow, and we'll see you guys again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You can listen to Korea Now with me, SJ Lee, by downloading the Arirang Radio application, or tune in online by visiting www.arirangradio.com. So make sure you tune in Mondays through Fridays, 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. Korea time.